Hi everybody. I did my narrative project on the history of salmon ecology. I was looking at the evolution of that field of study, and it dates back to the Native Americans all the way up to today. One major event for Native Americans has been the first salmon ceremony, and this is their celebration of the fishing season beginning. It was in their practice to have the salmon chief choose a certain member of the tribe to catch the first salmon of the season. Lewis and Clark, who were explorers that documented a lot of organisms along their journey, including salmon, stumbled upon the first salmon ceremony on the west coast of the U.S. Meriwether Lewis wrote, "There was great joy with the natives last night in consequence of the arrival of the salmon. One of those fish was caught. This was the harbinger of good news to them. They informed us that these fish would arrive in great quantities in the course of about 5 days. This fish was dressed and was being divided into small pieces and was given to each child in the village. This custom is founded in a superstitious opinion that it will hasten the arrival of the salmon." So they actually arrived towards the end of the ceremony. But it's interesting to note that there's such great quantity of salmon in these runs, and that they're able to host a great ceremony every year. Another practice of the ceremony was after the first fish was caught and butchered and served, they would take all the innards and bones and anything that's left over, and they would ceremoniously return it to the water as an offering so that they could have ample runs of salmon in the future. This picture is from a first salmon ceremony in the 1940s. It shows the entire tribe feasting on salmon, and this is after the ceremoniously prepared first salmon. But obviously they catch more and they share it as a tribe, and it's a great day of celebration. This shows them smoking the meat. What was special about the first salmon ceremony was that they're actually able to eat fresh meat, which was rare. They normally would be eating the reserves of smoked fish that they had, so this is a picture of them preserving it. So in the late 1900s, there were a few years that the first salmon ceremony was actually delayed a few weeks. And the reason behind that is because there weren't enough salmon running. Some factors were water quality and passage obstruction from dams and predation, which we've seen get increasingly worse over time, and it's affected the populations. Some regulations that have been put in place to combat this is the Clean Water Act of 1972. In 1969, there was the Cuyahoga River Fire, which was a disaster that the United States just could not ignore. And the Clean Water Act set forth regulations to stop water pollution and maintain water quality standards across the country. Also in 1972, the Marine Mammal Protection Act was put into place, and this made it illegal to harass, feed, hunt, capture, or kill any marine mammals. And this encompassed the salmon, which was a more specific act for preserving their population. Canada set forth a wild salmon policy, which pretty much set the steps for a conservation plan of populations of wild salmon. We can see their integrated strategic planning guide, which talks about the salmon's life cycle and how they can utilize that information to conserve them. One of the major problems for salmon have been the construction of dams. Most of them are for hydroelectric power. In 1937, President Roosevelt signed the Bonneville Project Act, and that approved the construction of 4 dams on the lower Snake River. And this is on the west coast of the United States. And the Columbia River, the Snake River, and the Salmon River is a huge habitat for salmon. And he proposed and signed this act, which was completely disrupting their passageway. In the name of the act is Bonneville, and that's because one of them is Bonneville Dam. Other major ones are the John Day Dam, the Ice Harbor Dam, Lower Monumental Dams, Little Goose Dam, Lower Granite Dam. There's a surprising amount of dams because this river is so powerful and can create so much energy that they felt needed to be harnessed. The Endangered Salmon Predation Protection Act of 2018 was a response to the effect that dams had on salmon. This gave permission to kill sea lions in a certain area of the Columbia River and the tributaries to protect the salmon from the sea lion's predation. The reason that this is associated with dams is because even with passageways through dams, salmon get caught up in pools below the dams, and they're very vulnerable to predation because they really have nowhere to go, and where they thought they were going is completely obstructed, and then they're very vulnerable to the sea lions, which happen to be in the area. One invention that truly helped salmon in conquering this issue is the fish ladder. And we have some locally. I'm sure everybody has heard of them, but the first patented one was in 1837 in New Brunswick, Canada. And then we didn't see them in the US until 1880. But these are standard for hydroelectric dams because they're necessary for salmon to cross the dams. Another response to the obstruction that dams have caused is hatcheries upstream of the dams. And in theory, this would replace the salmon that aren't able to make it past the dams. So that was one strategy that was actually funded by the Bonneville Power Administration, who were actually responsible for the damage that has been done to the salmon. Another interesting method that they tried in the 1970s was aerial restocking, where they would fly above the dams and drop the salmon fingerlings from the sky. And here's a video from Utah where they actually do this, I believe annually. And so this would look similar to what they were trying in the 1970s for the salmon. Another huge adversity for salmon is fish farming. This has been something that's been going on since the 1960s. It started in Norway. And it's because our population has had such a need for salmon, and there's a huge market for it. Our population's growing, so we need more fish. And so they started to mass produce them, and that could involve tanks on land, and also what you can see here are farms in the ocean. One problem with this is salmon can escape, and their genetic makeup is not the same as native salmon. And this leads to mating, and it messes up the genetic diversity in a negative way. So they try to minimize it, but with this practice, it's something that can't be ignored because it's just been a problem in the past, and there's been some serious contaminations on a huge scale. Since the 1970s, tens of millions of farmed salmon have escaped into the wild. The interbreeding that happens after this decreases the fitness of these fish in the wild because they're not designed to be in the wild. And then they therefore affect the populations that are native to the areas. So this is something that genetic testing has had to keep up with. That's one way that they've been able to study salmon, and they've also been able to collect juvenile salmon and do fish counts at fish ladders. Another interesting method is looking at DNA in fish slime, which is on the salmon skin. And all of these techniques have developed because of the hardship that has been put on salmon. And the goal is to conserve the resource for everybody in an equitable way. So I hope that this history lesson helped your understanding of salmon conservation and the ecology behind it.